We now come to the first Opposition Day motion on local government funding. Shadow Secretary of State Andrew Gwynne to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move the motion in my name and those of my right honourable and honourable friends. The motion today presented before the House calls on the Government to respond to the challenges that are faced by local government. And I want to start by paying tribute to councillors of all political persuasions and none, and council officers and staff who have risen to those difficult challenges over the past 8 years, making really tough decisions, but ones that have often sought to protect public services. But as I'll go on to explain, Madam Deputy Speaker, all levels of local government are now saying that these cuts have to end or local government will collapse. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm also proud of my own roots in local government, having served on Tameside Metropolitan Borough Council for 12 years before coming to this House. My wife is also a Tameside councillor, approaching her 19th year of service, and I know the very difficult decisions that she and her colleagues continue to have to make due to the decisions taken by members of this House and this government. For those without the first-hand experience, the work of local government, as the Secretary of State recently put it, may seem small in the grand scheme of things. But to consider those working at the coalface in local councils as merely cogs in a machine to make the jobs of politicians in Westminster easier is a failure to recognise the real value, the responsibility and the pride shown by our local leaders. I'll give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. In May, I will cease being a councillor after 8 years as a member of the London Borough of Redbridge. And in my borough, and I suspect every other Labour authority up for election this year, that what will be happening is Conservative candidates will be out there attacking them for council tax increases which have been forced on them by the savage cuts of this Tory government to protect public services. Isn't this an example of the utter hypocrisy of the Conservative Party? Great anti-cuts campaigners locally, but cheering them through and voting them through in this place.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and of course part of the reason, and it's two sides of the same coin, you've had 8 years of cuts to local councils, meaning that those budgets that councils have directly to spend from this place have shrunk. But it's also this place that then has allowed councils to increase council tax. This year they increased the limit by a further 1%, and of course what that means is that they are merely shifting the blame onto local councillors of all political persuasions. This isn't a party political point, and I will give way in a moment, but I'm responding to my honourable friend, and that is why it is so unfair. They have devolved the cuts, they have devolved the blame, and they have sought to distance themselves from decisions that each and every member sitting opposite is directly responsible for. I'll give way.
But would remind him that council tax is less in real terms than it was in 2010. And doesn't he think that he should think about his party's own record, because between 1997 and 2010, council tax doubled?
I'd remind the honourable gentleman that council spending is less in real terms since 2010 as well. My own local authority, Tameside, in the decade to 2020 will have lost close to £200 million of government funding. That is unsustainable, and he has some responsibility because of his votes on that. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making an excellent speech, and would he agree with me that one of the particularly perturbing cuts is that to children's services, and every single local authority leader, regardless of party, is screaming out for more money for children, which makes such an impact in the long term, the cuts to children when they're so young. We must give every single child the best start in life.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
My honourable friend's absolutely right, and if ever cuts had consequences, it manifests itself in the problems faced by our children's services. I won't give way just yet. I'm still answering my honourable friend, because what we are seeing in all councils that are responsible for children's services is the real increase in demand, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on in my contribution. But it isn't just coming from me, it's coming from the Tory-controlled Local Government Association. They are saying that children's services requires an extra £2 billion of funding. That is quite clear. It's coming from county councils, it's coming from metropolitan district councils, it's coming from unitary councils, it's coming from the special interest group of municipal authorities, it's coming from the county councils network, it's coming from the Tory-controlled LGA. Everybody is now singing from the same hymn sheet. Yet when it comes to the priorities of this government, they were faced with a choice in the November budget. And what did they choose? They chose a £5 billion tax giveaway to the bank levy and voted down an amendment from this side of the House where we pledged to put the £2 billion into children's services exactly where his own Tory councillors are saying it needs to go. Now, I'll make a little bit of progress. Well, I've kind of given 4 interventions already, and I'm only on page 2 of my speech, so a little bit of patience, perhaps, from members opposite. Because the fact is that the sense, and going back to politicians of all political persuasions and none in local government, it is the sense of pride and responsibility that is why many of us came into politics, to make our world a better place for the people we grew up with, our neighbours, our family, our local communities. And it's therefore saddening that there's even a need for this debate today. But the fact is, well, I'll just move on. The fact is that since 2010, local government has borne the brunt of the public spending cuts. Since 2010, 49.1% of central government funding has been cut from local government. And it's interesting that the PPS is giving his backbenchers cue cards and whispers in the ears on what to say. So I won't be giving way to the honourable gentleman, because if he can't think of his own intervention without the help of the parliamentary private secretary, it's probably not worthy. Madam Deputy Speaker, metropolitan district councils have seen a reduction in spending power of 33.9%. In real terms...
I think you make a 5 minute...
Order. The honourable gentleman will give way if he wishes to, but we must hear his speech. Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The metropolitan district councils have seen a reduction in spending power of 33.9% in real terms from 2010 to 2017-18. Over the same period, county councils' spending power has fallen by 22.1%. But spending power masks the true scale of the cuts to government grants. And this is having a drastic impact on council services. Youth centres, museums and libraries are having to close. Our social care system is in crisis. Compared to 2010, there are now 455 fewer libraries, 1,240 fewer Sure Start centres and 600 fewer youth centres. I will give way to the honourable gentleman if he can defend closing 600 youth centres.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's all well and good, the honourable gentleman talking about the difficulties from 2010, but the reality is that many of those difficulties have been caused by the policies of the Labour government. I was a district councillor for 8 years. I know how tough it was. Take some responsibility for what you delivered.
Well, I was a councillor, as I say, for 12 years, 11 years of which were under a Labour government, and we had 11 years of growth in our local authority, and that was something to be proud of. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the record gets worse. I will give way.
Thank you. I thank you very much for giving way, and thank you for excellent speech. But I feel like the atmosphere in here is ignoring the fact, the very real consequences of what we're talking about. I've mentioned it before. In my constituency, there are 140 more looked after children who have been taken into care because they haven't had the early intervention and the early support. And the members opposite can laugh and joke and make this into something that's meant to be some sort of comedy show. But I'm sorry, we are talking about the impact on real people's lives. Real people's lives being changed forever because of the actions of this government, and I do not think that is a laughing matter.
And my honourable friend is right to be angry. When the public watching this debate see Tory MPs laughing and sneering and smirking at our public services in crisis, they will know what side the Tories are on, and it's not on their side. I'll give way to the honourable lady.
Thank the honourable member for giving way, because I do believe this is an important debate. And yes, the Liberal Democrats were on the side of now the opposite side. Listen. We were there to say we needed to tighten our belts, but for a long time now we have said enough is enough. We are seeing the impact on our local services. We cannot stand by any longer. You all must have constituents coming.
Order. Would the honourable lady sit down? Thank you. The Speaker referred to this the other day. We really mustn't use the word you. You have to address through the chair. There's a reason for that. So I would urge the honourable lady and all honourable and right honourable colleagues to just... That convention stands. We're a hob hand.
I apologise, Madam Deputy Speaker. They, on the opposite benches, should understand what we are doing to our local services. Right. They should have the constituents coming into their surgeries and... Order. That's a very, very long intervention. Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable lady is right that these cuts have gone far too far. Many of my constituents, though, will not forgive the Liberal Democrats for the part they played in pushing through the deepest levels of austerity in the coalition government. And many of those hard choices have resulted in some of the increases in demand that we are now seeing, particularly in children's services and in adult social care. I will give way to the honourable lady.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. He is very generous indeed. I understand his call for more funding for local government, but can he explain why members opposite voted against the local government finance settlement, which did give councils more money? Why was that? Why did the members opposite vote against that?
Nowhere near. Because it is a matter of fact that the local government finance settlement went nowhere near the gaps that have been created by her party in local government. We do not support ongoing austerity. We want to ensure that we reinvest in our public services, and that's why I hope the honourable lady will be joining us in the lobbies tonight, because if she believes in defending public services, if she wants to see more money for our local councils, then she can support our motion tonight, and I look forward to her being in our lobby. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, house building has fallen to its lowest rate since the 1920s, and homelessness is rising. The number of people sleeping rough on our streets has more than doubled since 2010. And the Secretary of State can chunter, but I don't think that doubling the number of rough sleepers is a record for the Housing Secretary to be proud of. Older people are not living with the dignity and the comfort that they deserve because of the cuts to social care. The outsourcing of public services has led to one scandal after another, and the collapse of private outsourcing companies like Carillion have put services at further risk. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, Demand for children's services is placing growing pressure on all councils. Central government funding to support children and their families has been cut by 55% since the Conservatives came to office. Well, if the honourable gentleman can say where the extra £1.7 billion that has been cut from children's services is going to be made up from, I look forward to hearing his suggestion.
The honourable gentleman mentioned outsourcing and was critical of it in his comments. Can he say, during his time as a councillor, as to whether he ever supported or endorsed the taking of a PFI contract or outsourcing?
The fact is that, well, no, the fact is that we have seen a catastrophic failure of the privatisation of our council services. And I can tell the honourable gentleman that the next Labour government will introduce new rules to allow councils that want to fully insource their services without let or hindrance by the government, because we support publicly owned, publicly accountable public services. But I did actually give way to the gentleman behind who has been so patiently bobbing for the past however many minutes.
I'm very grateful for giving away and being so generous. I'd just like to go to the issues in Cumbria. In Cumbria, we had the opportunity for a devolution deal. It didn't happen. In Cumbria, we had the opportunity to reduce the number of councils and councillors, which would have brought in a saving of around 25 million, all money that could have been spent on frontline services. The reason for the failure was due to Labour councils and Labour council leaders. Do you not think that's a failure of the Labour Party?
Well, of course, the fact is he didn't want to tell me where the £1.7 billion shortfall for children's services was coming from. And I know that in Cumbria, there is a shortfall in funding for children's services, as well as every other county council in England, every metropolitan district council in England, unitary councils across England. They're all saying the same thing. Perhaps he ought to speak up for Cumbria and get the extra money for Cumbria's children's services. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the result of these cuts has been appallingly clear. Cuts to early years intervention has meant a record number of children, some 72,000. Just stop and think about that. 72,000 children last year were taken into care. The number of serious child protection cases has doubled in the last 7 years, with 500 new cases launched every day. More than 170,000 children were subject to child protection plans last year. Double the number 7 years ago. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Like the honourable member, I was a councillor. I was a councillor for 25 years. And will he not acknowledge that the removal and cutting slowly over the last 7 or 8 years of early intervention services, specialist family services and support and grants for charities that also support people in the community and families in the community, does he not recognise that that is part of the reason there are too many children coming into children's services too late, too many serious problems?
Absolutely. Honourable friend is absolutely right. And you know, in the Parliament from 2010 to 2015, we had numerous debates on children's services, particularly on the cuts to Sure Start. And I think that Sure Start had the basis of being one of the previous Labour government's greatest achievements, had it been allowed to remain in place, fully funded in the way that Labour intended. But you know what used to gall me the most? Was member upon member on the benches opposite saying Sure Start was a waste of money, Sure Start didn't work. Sure Start was never intended to be a quick fix. You tell me in 20 years' time, when the children that have gone through Sure Start are parents themselves, when the parents who've gone through Sure Start are grandparents, you tell me then whether Sure Start worked or not, because I believe one of the biggest tragedies of the David Cameron era of government was the slash and burn approach to early years. I'll give way to my friend again.
the points about Sure Start, one of the issues that our schools are facing at the moment is a number of children attending school not classified as school-ready. There's an increased number of children who have oracy problems, an increased number of children starting school who are not toilet-trained, adding more impact on resources for our schools. This is because there isn't the support there with the health visitors for the children, there isn't the support there with the Sure Start services either. And do you not think that it is time, does the government not think it's time to reverse these cuts if you are genuinely committed to giving every child the best possible start? Or is it only the children that have the best possible start, the ones who have the money to pay for it?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and this is the short-termism approach of the current government and their predecessor, the coalition government. But in making short-term savings in a particular year, it has resulted in massive cost increases and demand increases further down. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman as he keeps trying to intervene on interventions.
When they transmute into speeches, some of us do get a little frustrated. But the point is this. Difficult decisions had to be made when we were faced with the highest budget deficit since the war in 2010. What the honourable gentleman is effectively saying is that we should have protected the DCLG budget just as we chose to protect the NHS. To maintain that, what taxes would he have increased, or what other departments would he have cut to pay for it?
Answer it. I'll take no lectures from a member who voted to cut the bank levy by £5 billion. But I would just politely point him out to the grey book that we published with our manifesto for the many, not the few. I'm sure it's well thumbed by the benches opposite, where we pledge to give this year and every year an additional £1.5 billion for local councils, where we pledge to give, well, the Secretary of State says he'll tell me. I'm glad that he's looking into Labour policy development. Perhaps he ought to consider his own policy development on these matters, because the government is so woefully lacking in any such proposals. But the point is, it fully costed £500 million for early years, £8 billion for... No, I won't give way again, because I'm actually answering his question. £8 billion for social care, and when put together, that is a better deal, a far better deal for our children, our elderly and our councils than the Conservatives have been able to come forward with. Because the point is, I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Is it not about time, would my honourable friend not agree with me, that it's about time we bust these Tory myths about the reality of the economic shock that this country faced? Yes. And actually, the reality was the economy was growing when Labour left office, and it was actually the absurd austerity policies. It was the absurd austerity policies of the Tory party that prolonged the recession and made it worse, and is now the longest recovery in our economic history of this country.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and it can't be said often enough. The fact is that when the Gordon Brown government ended, the economy was growing again. That is a statement of fact. And, well, the Secretary of State chunters again about the deepest recession. I think he'll find that the global crash started in the United States of America, which even his former Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, now acknowledges. I'll give way to my friend.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. He's making a great points this afternoon. Would he agree with me that the children's services crisis is worsened due to the 1% pay freeze over the last 8 years? And I hope that we hear good news at the end of this debate from the Minister, that they can be brought in line with the NHS pay increases as well.
My honourable friend makes a really important point there, and I'll come on to some of those points in my contribution. But the point that she makes is very well made, because the fact is that we have not just seen the hollowing out of our local services, we have also seen the impact that that's having on local government as a whole. Now, I know it's an inconvenient truth for ministers opposite, because they will say, and I'm sure the Secretary of State, when he responds to the debate in his pre-prepared speech, will say that I'm making overtly political responses, because it seems to be his stock answer. He seems to forget it is the job of the opposition to point out the failings of the government, and there are many failings when it comes to local government policy. But the point is, it's not just the Labour Party that's saying this. The National Audit Office. Now, surely they recognise the National Audit Office as a reputable organisation that knows what they are talking about. They've told us what this government's policies mean. It means that 1 in 10 councils with social care obligations will have exhausted their reserves within the next 3 years. It means that short-term fixes of the current government are not working, and that local government still has no idea on how the local government finance is going to work after 2020. It's about the cost of negligence being paid for by communities across the country, that as vital services are cut, because this government shifts the blame onto local councils, giving them so-called flexibility but then criticising them when they use it, that we are seeing council tax bills increasing. Planning and development, the National Audit Office has shown, has been cut by 52.8%. Now, if we're to meet the government's ambitious targets for new homes, who will be the planners of the future? Who will identify the land to be built on? Who will process the planning applications? Who will be the enforcement officers to ensure that the homes and the buildings are built in accordance with the plans? On transport, funding has been cut by 37.1%. These are our bus routes. These are the vital links between our communities. These are our roads, our pavements, our cycleways. And I notice that members are now silent on this. But of course, I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Extremely kind of him. But it has to be said, he is continuing the same argument. He is effectively saying, when we had the deficit, we chose to protect the NHS and had to make other difficult choices. He is effectively saying that they would have protected the Department of Communities local government budget. He has to therefore tell us what other budgets would he have cut or what taxes would he have increased to pay for that protection. He has to.
Well, I think people watching the honourable gentleman's intervention will find it hard to believe he's protected the NHS for a start. But even that, the point is, and I'm glad that he intervened on the issue of transport, because it's rather ironic. He comes here and says that we would want to protect local government. He's damn right we want to protect local government. But so does his Defence Secretary. His Defence Secretary took to Twitter a couple of weeks ago decrying the fact that Conservative-controlled Staffordshire County Council was removing bus services from his constituency. The same Defence Secretary who voted for the cuts in this place. I'll give way.
One of the impacts of the cuts to transport is actually the declining number of people doing apprenticeships and how difficult they find it to travel to college to complete their apprenticeship because of the cost of local transport. This was a policy that was actually in the Conservative manifesto. They promised to give apprentices subsidised travel for local transport, but it is another impact of where their promises have failed, and they have failed to deliver because they don't seem to be capable of any joined-up thinking.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, but it's not just transport, it's food safety, it's the day-to-day services of street cleaning, of bins and museums, heritage, cultural services, it's our libraries, it's the glue and of the fabric of our local communities. And I don't support this government's notion that they can continue making cuts to these vital day-to-day services without it having an impact. But it's not just the National Audit Office. Well, if he'll let me, and I'll come back, because I need to draw my remarks to a conclusion, but I will take a couple of additional interventions before I do. It's the Institute for Fiscal Studies. They were warning back in 2015 that deprived areas are suffering the hardest from council cuts. The government called for councils to then spend their reserves and sell off their assets. I have to say that's something that Tory Northamptonshire followed to the T, and look where that got them. But the point is, Local government leaders warned of the coming crisis in adult social care, and the government said town halls are hoarding billions in their piggy banks. The Municipal Journal recently wrote, in response to this toxic situation, "This is a wholly unsustainable position and has already led to speculation about the long-term futures of 4 other counties which have used significant cash reserves in recent years: Surrey, Lancashire, Somerset and Norfolk." Well, all I can say, I'll give way in a second, all I can say that if the Surreys of this world are now struggling and pleading poverty to the Secretary of State, heaven help the Liverpools, the Manchesters, the Birminghams, the Tamesides and the Hulls of this world. I'll give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. He's very generous. Does he not agree with me if we are going to a wholesale reform of local government funding, at least it should be fair and it should not punish those areas that are already more deprived than our less deprived areas? It must be a fair funding formula. Currently, what has been proposed isn't.
The honourable lady is absolutely right, and anything that comes out of the mouths of ministers with the words fair and funding does send shivers down my spine. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for giving way. As you say, I'm a standing councillor just now. So I appreciate this very important speech. As a councillor, I know these cuts are how they're going. But in Scotland, there's 1.5 billion that's been slashed from local government since the SNP came to power. Would you say they're conveyor belt along with the Nationalists? That's how simply it's happening. As Tory austerities continue in Scotland because of it.
My honourable friend can speak very well for his experiences in Scotland. Of course, the point is that Tory austerity south of the border is absolutely driving local councils to the edge of that financial cliff. I'm very sorry if that is also being replicated north of the border by the SNP government in Holyrood. I must make a little bit more progress. I will give way once more before I conclude my remarks, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, there's little surprise that when we talk to Conservative members in private, they are just as concerned about what's going on in their own local communities as Labour members are in public. But when we look at what's happening across local government, the fact is it's not just the opposition, it's not just the IFS, it's not just the National Audit Office, it's not just the media that cover local government that are all saying the same things. It's also members of the Conservative Party. Ensuring that vulnerable children have the protection that they need should not be a party political matter, which is why I am grateful to the work of the member for East Worthing and Shoreham in the work that he's done to highlight the crisis in children's services. The member for Harrow East, who's now a police minister, has campaigned against library closures, and as I've said, the Defence Secretary has expressed concerns over the loss of bus services by his Tory-controlled Staffordshire County Council. And he is right. The government can talk the talk on social mobility. They can talk the talk about supporting apprenticeships. They can talk about investing in local communities. But at the moment, we know that people, as my honourable friend said in an intervention, who are looking to work, looking to find work or an apprenticeship, who live in rural areas, they can't get there because there are no local transport services for them to use. I agree with the Defence Secretary. I only hope he'll be in the lobby supporting his Twitter petition with us today. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, for many years we've argued for a change of direction, whilst the government has stuck its head in the sand. I will give way.
Thank my honourable friend for giving me that point. Would my honourable friend not agree with me that what we've seen today on display in the most spectacular fashion is total Tory economic illiteracy about what this country has faced? And had the Tory party continued with Labour's stimulus plan, we would have restored the public finances at a far faster rate than has been achieved under their totally self-defeating austerity project.
Look at America.
My honourable friend's absolutely right, and the evidence was there when we left office, and the almost immediate impact of Chancellor George Osborne turning off the taps was apparent for all to see. I won't give way now, because today's vote offers all members on both sides of the House an opportunity to send a very clear message to the government and to this Secretary of State that things have to change urgently, that our vital public services should be properly funded, and that our communities need and expect their councils to deliver the services that they want to see. So I hope that all members will join us in the lobby to stand up for their communities, to stand up for their public services, and yes, to stand up for their councillors too, because it's not just about Labour councillors, it's about Conservative councillors, it's about Liberal Democrat councillors, it's about independent councillors, it's about everybody who serves our communities in the town and county halls across England. Because the point is, this government needs to think again about the impact of their reckless and short-sighted approach to council funding. Because Northamptonshire is the first, but it almost certainly will not be the last. For local government, money tomorrow is no solution to a crisis that is happening today. I urge all honourable and right honourable members to support us in the lobbies, and I commend this motion to the House.
The question is, as on the order paper.